And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Okay, we'll start the marine segment off with tonight's forecast showing low pressure tracking slowly eastward here to the Alaska Peninsula. And the front continuing to push rain east-northeastward here into Kodiak Island, back up into the southern Kuskokwim Delta. Weaker trough here over the eastern interior keeps rain going in the Tanana Valley, rain and showers all the way down into areas from Cook Inlet into Prince William Sound, portions of the Copper River Basin. Dry for the southeast coast, weak high pressure there. And then for tomorrow, this low slowly tracking eastward and gale force northwest winds behind that thing across the Alaska Peninsula, and increasing winds late tomorrow here for the North Gulf Coast into the Barren Islands, southern Cook Inlet, with rain back in across southern Alaska here. Drier to the north, showers with this trough up in the north central part of the state, actually from Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue area eastward into the upper Yukon Valley. Could be another partly to mostly sunny day for the central and eastern north slope tomorrow out to the Arctic coast. Just a risk of a shower back to the west. Next system pushing some wind and rain into the far western Aleutians. And then for Thursday, big change for the southeast coast. High pressure moves off and this front comes in with increasing winds and rain with some possible gales on the north coast. Definitely looking at gale force winds here for the North Gulf Coast into the Barren Islands Wednesday night and at least into most of Thursday. And even southern Cook Inlet, gale warnings are out. Drier up here over the northern interior. In fact, maybe some clearing there in the central and eastern part of the state. Showers up along the Brooks Range, some of those spilling into the western north slope, and scattered showers out here to the west with weak high pressure trying to kill them or end the showers. Not quite doing it there, but just widely scattered showers. So another nice day for the eastern Aleutians, or a nice day for the eastern Aleutians. Trailing edge of this weakening front, the lows hanging back to the west there. So this front will really be weakening as it heads eastward, especially in the southern areas there, holding together a little bit better up to the north. And moving on to the coastal water forecast for the south coast of the Panhandle. Tomorrow, winds still on the light side here, west 10 to 15 knots, northwest 15 on the central coast. East to southeast winds 10 to 25 knots, picking up late tomorrow here on the extreme north coast, so those seas up to 7 feet. Southeast winds, Stevens Passage and Lynn Canal at 10 knots, northwest at 10 for Stevens Passage. Then with the front moving in on Thursday, small craft advisories, south to southwest winds 25 to 30 knots on the south coast, and south to southeast winds 30 to 35 knots on the central coast, and 35 to 45 knot winds, or 30 to 45 knot winds on the north coast from the east-southeast. Seas 9 to 10 feet up in this area and about 7 to 8 feet down to the south. Small craft advisories also in store for the inner channels there, except Lynn Canal, gale warning there, southeast 35 knots with higher gusts. Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait, southeast at 25 knots. Prince William Sound for tomorrow, southeast winds at 15 knots, and the eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast at 20. Small craft advisories for the western North Gulf Coast, southeast increasing to 25 knots. We've got east winds at 30 knots for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay. Small craft advisories developing for southern Cook Inlet for easterly winds at 25 knots. And then for Thursday, northwest winds 30 knots here for southern Cook Inlet, north at 15, north of the Forelands, and northwest winds at 30 knots with 10-foot seas there for Kamishak Bay. Gale force northwest winds at 35 knots there for the Barren Islands. North winds 40 knots for the western North Gulf Coast. In fact, gale warnings for all of the North Gulf Coast, north at 40 here on the west side, and east to northeast 35 to 45 knots there for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Prince William Sound, northeast winds 25 knots. Kodiak Island, east to northeast winds at 20 to 25 knots tomorrow. And west winds here, west-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots with higher gusts for the Alaska Peninsula. Winds southeast at 15 knots for Bristol Bay. And then on Thursday, west winds 15 to 20 knots for the peninsula, west 20 knots for Bristol Bay, and west-northwest winds 30 to 40 knots there for the Kodiak Island area. And for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, small craft advisories, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots with gusts of 40 knots there for Unalaska Island. West at 20 knots for the central Aleutians, and out west, winds swinging around to the south late and picking up to about 20 knots. And then on Thursday, small craft advisories there for Amchitka Island, Kiska Island, Shimmy and Attu, southwest winds 25 knots with 8 to 10 foot seas. Adak and Atka, southwest at 20 knots, seas 4 to 5 feet. And for the eastern Aleutians, southwest winds 15 knots with seas 4 feet. And for the Kuskokwim Delta coast tomorrow, small craft advisories, north winds 25 knots, much lighter for the Yukon Delta coast northward. They're at about 10 knots, northeast at 10 for St. Lawrence Island, light winds in Norton Sound. Pribilof, small craft advisories, northwest at 25 knots, St. Matthew Island, northwest at 15. And for the day on Thursday, Kuskokwim Delta coastline here, Cape Newenham up to Nunivak Island, west winds at 15 knots, southwest 15 for the Pribilofs, south at 20 for St. Matthew Island and the southwest coast, the Yukon Delta coast, northwest at 10, west winds at 10 knots for St. Lawrence Island. Small craft advisories tomorrow for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. East winds 25 knots, seas 4 to 5 feet, east at 15 for the central coast. Then pretty light winds here for the western Arctic coast and the Chukchi Sea, mostly north at 10 knots, seas 2 feet. And for the day on Thursday, Chukchi Sea, west winds at 10 knots, seas 2 feet, north to northeast winds for the western Arctic coast at 10 to 15 knots. And east winds at 20 knots for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coastlines with seas at around 4 feet.